Romans 15 and verse 4. I've got to stand right next to this thing, I guess. So whatsoever things were written aforetime were written for our learning, that we through patience and comfort of the Scriptures might have hope. What's he talking about, things that were written aforetime? Yeah. Whatsoever things written aforetime were written for our learning. Which things? How much of the Old Testament was written for our learning? All right. All of it. Why don't we study it more? 39 books. Old Testament, 27 in the New. Danny?
I like the characters in the Bible, like Noah and his grace that God gave him. Then got another example, David.
Yeah.
And if you read, I can relate to the Bible more because that's folks that's described in the Bible. And they are examples for us. Matter of fact, Hebrews 12, Hebrews 11 was Hall of Faith. And then the Bible says Hebrews 12, we are compassionate also glad of God of witnesses. Other those witnesses, those folks there are those who have lived in the Old Testament now.
Right.
And they are great, many of them great examples. Jason teaches prayer. We should pray more.
Right.
But it's like Hannah. She prayed for a child, wasn't just a child. She prayed exactly for a son.
Right.
And then after Elijah, he said, don't let it rain 3.5 years, and it did.
Yeah.
And he let it rain again.
Prayed again and rain.
That was a great example. Abraham's faith.
Yeah.
Father of faith.
Well, I'm sure Jason's going to cover a lot of these things in his teachings on prayer, but we underestimate prayer. We don't realize, I think most of the time, just how powerful prayer is, how it can be, and we don't take advantage, I think, as much as we should. 2 Timothy 3, says, verse 16 and 17, says, all Scripture is given by inspiration of God and is profitable for doctrine, for reproof, for correction, for instruction in righteousness. He's talking about that's what we're talking about. These things written aforetime were written for our learning. This is the Old Testament Scriptures, and he's referring to that here in this verse, as well as what's already being written in the New Covenant. He said it's profitable for doctrine, for reproof, for correction, for instruction in righteousness. But look at verse 17, that the man of God may be perfect or complete, thoroughly furnished unto every good work. So I think when we start leaving out part of the Bible and only concentrating on a certain part of it, and I think it's easier for us to study the New Covenant because that's what we're living under, and that's always kind of been the argument. Well, we don't live under the old law. We don't need to go back to that. But the Bible says these things are written for our learning, and not only that, but there's a lot to be learned as we study from the old law, the Old Covenant. Look at 1 Corinthians 10 and verse 11.
There's a lot of learning from the New Testament as well. The New Testament is also written for our learning.
Oh, yeah. All the Scriptures are. 1 Corinthians 10 and verse 11 beginning. So these things happen unto them for examples, and they are written for our admonition, upon whom the ends of the world to come. Wherefore let him that thinketh he standeth take heed lest he fall. Now what's he talking about here in verse 11 of chapter 10? Well, you go back up to the beginning of the chapter and you get the context of what he's talking about. He's talking about what happened to some of the children of Israel. These things written aforetime, written for our learning. So we need to learn from this. Go back up to verse 1. Moreover, brethren, I would not that you should be ignorant how that all our fathers were under the cloud and passed through the sea, and were all baptized unto Moses in the cloud and in the sea, and did all eat the same spiritual meat, did all drink the same spiritual drink, for they drank of that spiritual rock that followed them, and that rock was Christ. But with many of them God was not well pleased, for they were overthrown in the wilderness. What's he talking about here? As they came out of Egypt, God raised up Moses, showed his power over and over and over in the plagues on Egypt through Moses, and then they crossed the Red Sea on dry ground. And then when the Egyptians tried to follow them, the sea closed up and they all drowned. And now they're wandering around in the wilderness. God's he's taking care of them. And but he says, he says, but many of them God was not well pleased, verse 5, for they were overthrown in the wilderness. And he goes on down, he's going to talk about some of the things that they did that was displeasing to God. But let's get verse 6. Now these things were our examples, to the intent that we should not lust after evil things as they also lusted. And that's one of the things he's talking about. Some of the things that they did, the mistakes that they made, we can learn from that so that we don't make the same mistake. Verse 7 says, neither be idolaters as some of them, as it was written, the people sat down to eat and drink and rose up to play. Let's see, Exodus 32, going back to the Old Covenant, which is what we're talking about.
I think one of the worst things they did while I was in the wilderness is murmur and complain, murmur,
Yeah.
complain.
Yeah.
All the time. God
Well,
was so gracious,
yeah.
providing all the food and water they needed,
Right,
but still murmuring and complaining.
right. Verse 6 of Exodus 32 says, they rose up early on the morrow and offered burnt offerings and brought peace offerings, and the people sat down to eat and to drink and rose up to play. He's talking about the golden calf that Aaron had built for them while Moses was up in the mountain getting the law. Well, he said they sat down to eat and rose up to play. And that's one of the references he has to what he's talking about there in 1 Corinthians. They began to worship idols. They hadn't been out of Egypt hardly any time at all, less than a year. And here they are beginning to go back into their old ways because they were concerned, uncertain, I should say, about what had happened to Moses. He'd been gone, 40 days. He was going to be in the mountain 40 days getting the law, and they didn't know if he's coming back or not. They hadn't seen him, and so they were just, well, we're going to have to do is we're going to have to take the bull by the horn. We're going to have to do our own thing. So they began to fall back into their old ways. And Danny pointed out they began to murmur and complain. In verse 8 says, neither let us commit fornication. Some of them committed and fell in one day 3 and 20,000. That's again in Numbers chapter 25. But this is just some of the things they did. And then verse 10 says, neither murmur as some of them also murmured and were destroyed of the destroyer. Look back at verse 9. Neither let us tempt Christ as some of them also tempted and were destroyed of the serpents. So you see here the things that was happening to the children of Israel. And they ought to have been on their knees every day thanking God for delivering them out of bondage. They've been in Egypt 400-something years. And finally, here's the Savior rises to bring them out of that, all the bondage they'd been in for so long, and to bring them into their own land. And all this goes back to Genesis 12, verses 1 through 4, where God made the promise to Abraham that he was going to make of him a great nation, and he was going to give him a land. And then the third promise was that through thy seed, all the nations of the earth be blessed. And I've told you this before, but if you have trouble understanding the Old Testament, if you go back and read Genesis 12, 1 through 4, the rest of it really hinges on that. The rest of it is fulfillment of those promises that God had made to Abraham in Genesis 12. We see where Abraham was told to go out into a place he didn't even know where he was going. And we see there where he had his family. And then it goes on down to Isaac and Jacob and Esau. And then Jacob winds up with 12 sons. And Joseph, one of the sons, winds up in Egypt. So it's all just being laid out. It's God's making his plan. God's fulfilling his promise to Abraham through all these centuries to fulfill that third promise, that through Abraham's seed, all the nations will be blessed. If we don't go back and study the Old Testament, we won't never understand all that. We say, well, God made the promise, and we understand that the promise, that the fulfillment of that promise was Jesus Christ. Well, that's true. You're right about that. But there's a lot that took place before Jesus came on the scene. And all that God had to get the people ready. God had to prepare this nation of people so that Christ could come. Danny, I believe you had your hand up.
Abraham a lot. You know, God showed Abraham.
Yeah,
Why didn't he choose somebody else?
right,
You know, the same matter. He was God's chosen people through
Yeah.
Abraham.
yeah,
And through Abraham's seed, that one seed came dry. And we got to choose Jesus.
yeah.
You choose it in the Word, and we do that,
But
we will be.
that's what Genesis 12 said, that through thy seed, all of the nations of the earth shall be blessed. There's another passage I want to look at before we get too bogged down in that. Look over in Galatians 3. Yeah, Galatians 3 and verse 24. Everybody knows Galatians. Galatians 3. Says, wherefore, well, let's go back up to verse 23. Before faith came, we were under the law, shut up under faith, which would afterward be revealed. Wherefore the law was our schoolmaster, verse 24, to bring us unto Christ, that we might be justified by faith. You understand what that means? The law was what? Our teacher. The law was given so that Christ could come. It was to prepare the way for Christ to come into the world. In Genesis 49, Jacob is blessing his sons. He's giving each one a blessing to them what the future is going to hold for them. In Genesis 49 and verse 10, he said, but the scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor the staff from between his feet, till Shiloh comes. Shiloh was, of course, the Prince of Peace. Shiloh was another term for Jesus Christ. In other words, he said that Jesus would come through the tribe of Judah. So where did Jesus come? Through the tribe of Judah. So anyway, we read all this in the Old Testament. And it's our schoolmaster, it's our teacher, to bring us to understand who Christ is, where he came from, and what he's all about. The kings came through different tribes, but the priests did. The priests came through the tribe of Levi. So Jesus couldn't be a priest in that sense because he was of the tribe of Judah. Now, a lot of the kings came through the tribe of Judah. That's what Genesis 49:10 means. The scepter shall not depart from Judah until Shiloh comes. The scepter was authority, a rulership. That's where most of the kings came, not all of them, but the southern kingdom, the tribe of Judah came through there. So, but anyway, so you see, going back and reading all this, and we begin to understand the old law was our schoolmaster. It was to teach us what was going to happen, but who was to come, and God preparing the world for that. Was our schoolmaster to bring us to Christ, so that we might be justified by faith. That's the last part of that. What does it mean to be justified?
Just like you've never done it.
Pardon me?
Just like you've never done it. You sin,
Yeah.
you haven't done it because it's cleansed. You're free from that.
Justified means to be just before God, isn't it? To be right before God. Paul said this in Romans 5 and verse 1, said, therefore, being justified by faith, we have peace with God. When did Paul, Saul of Tarsus, before he became Paul, when did he have peace with God? Okay, he's on the road to Damascus. He's going to Damascus for what reason? Persecute the church, Christians. Jesus appears to him, and we know what he said. What did he say to Jesus? Jesus said, why are you persecuting me? And he says, who art thou, Lord? He said, I'm Jesus, whom thou persecutest. But then what did Jesus tell him to do? Don't anybody answer at once. Do what? Told him what? Go on to Damascus, and it would be told him what he must do. Because he asked, what would thou have me do, Lord? Okay, for how long ago, how long was this before Ananias came to him?
3 days.
3 days. What kind of situation was Paul in, or Saul at this point, during those 3 days? He was blind? Pardon me? Right. Fasted. Does that sound like a man who has peace? Okay, then what did Ananias tell him?
Rise and be baptized, what was that sin? It's called on the name of the Lord.
So what did he do? He arose, he was baptized, had his sins washed away. And that's when his faith justified him. At what point did he believe in Jesus? On the road to Damascus. He accepted Jesus as God's son on the road to Damascus. And he had faith in Jesus, but that faith didn't justify him until he did what God told him to do. Being therefore justified by faith, we have peace with God. So faith has to be a working faith. It has to be an obedient faith. Pardon me? Oh yeah. He said he did it with a clear conscience in Acts 23. He went about it. He thought he was doing the right thing. He thought he was doing God's work, but he found out he was wrong. And we see him. People talk about the change that Saul of Tarsus underwent, because at one point he's killing Christians, and at the next point he's trying to bring people back, bringing people to Christ. But see, the thing about Saul and Paul, he was very zealous in what he was doing both ways. He was zealous in persecuting the church because why? You hit it a while ago. He thought he was right. He thought he was doing God's work. And so he was all about that. But when Jesus appeared to him, he realized, hey, I'm going the wrong way here. He turns around, goes in the other direction, but it did nothing to his zeal. He was just as zealous about making Christians, so to speak, as he was about killing them before. So that part of him didn't change. He was on fire for God, both ways. One way he was wrong. Go ahead. Yeah. And we see that today, don't we? We see people in error religiously that are, they put us to shame sometimes with their zeal and dedication. I think about the Mormons. They out there, they get these young boys, they go out on mission trips, and they go for 2 years, and the family helps support them, and they support themselves and what have you. They're very zealous about what they're doing. But are they right? Yeah. So zeal is not always the good thing. It's good if it's channeled right, if it's in the proper perspective. But it talks about over here in Romans, on 1 Corinthians 10. Let me get back where I was at. Keep losing my place. We talked about murmuring. Danny, you mentioned something like that a while ago about murmuring.
But we don't do that.
Oh no, we would never do that. What does it mean to murmur? Is that what you're talking about? No. It ain't talking about just mumbling. It's talking about complaining. And what was they complaining about? Danny, you hit it a while ago.
Well, complaining about the food, about the water, about everything.
Yeah. Well, they didn't have any water. Here you brought us out here to starve us, to die of thirst. And we don't have any food. We'd be better off in Egypt.
In the book of Philippians, I won't tell you what chapter it was, but Paul said, do all things without murmuring and complaining.
Right.
All things, God.
Right. It don't leave out much, does it? All. But we tend to want to complain about at least little thing, But here they complained about, okay, first they didn't have any water, so God gave them water out of a rock. Then they were running out of food. There's a lot of people. Yeah, how many people came out of Egypt? You have any idea? Hunter's thinking. It's out there somewhere. He ain't got it yet. Give me an estimate.
About a million.
Pardon me?
Million.
At least. 603,550. And when they first numbered them. That's not counting the Levites. That's not counting women and children. That's talking about fighting men above age of 20. So there's probably at least 1.5 million people, maybe 2 million. A lot of people coming out of Egypt. You know how much water it takes to water that many people, or food for that matter? And where are they at? They're not out in the middle of the forest where they can kill animals and you got plenty of water streams running there. They're in the desert. There's no water. There's no food. And yet God's going to sustain them while they cross this desert. Of course, the idea was coming out of Egypt and going over to the land of Canaan and possess it. That was God's plan for them. But they didn't like God's plan. They wandered around in the wilderness because they didn't have faith in God. God sent the spies in, you remember, pretty soon. And the 10 of them came back, the 12 went in, 10 came back and said, oh, we can't take it, there's giants in the land, and we just can't do it. Who were the two? Joshua and Caleb. We can do it. Said, they're weak. They wouldn't listen to them. So anyway, so they began to murmur. That's some more of that murmuring and complaining we was talking about. So they didn't have any water, didn't have any food. So God gives them water out of a rock, gives them water on other occasions. Brought in quail, and give them manna how often? 6 days a week, wasn't it? What happened on the seventh day? Yeah, they could save enough on Friday for Saturday, but they couldn't save enough on Monday for Tuesday. It spoiled. So God was dealing with these people, and they should have realized that. But what is this manna? You have any idea what it is? Bread. Kind of like a sweet bread, sweet loaf. Pardon me? Called angel food. It is referred to in the Bible as angel food. Let me ask you, what do you think about what your favorite food is? What is your favorite food? And how would you like to eat that 3 times a day, 7 days a week, for months and even years? Yeah, but if you're looking over here and you say, okay, I got this, I love cornbread, I like this cornbread. That's all I've got. But at least I've got that. Before I didn't have that. Now I've got plenty of cornbread, so I can live on that. So that's the way they should have looked at it. And this was some fine tasting bread. This manna from heaven. But what did they do? Murmured, they whined, they complained, just like we'd get tired of that cornbread after a while. Lord, I need something besides this cornbread. Well, that's what this is. Exactly. What they said in Numbers 21, they said, Lord, we're tired of this light bread. We're tired of it. We've had enough. We've been eating this for a long time now. We're tired of it. All this is in the Old Covenant. See, we don't read it, we don't understand. So what did God do? How did he deal with that?
Got snakes on them.
Pardon me?
Snakes.
Serpents. Fiery serpents. What's the difference in a serpent and a fiery serpent? A fiery serpent is a serpent on steroids. Now they're going after you. It's kind of like you might think about a rattlesnake and a moccasin. Rattlesnake will go away from you if he hears you coming. You corner him, he's going to coil up and strike you. Now moccasin just the opposite. The cottonmouth especially, they'll come towards you. They don't run. They're aggressive. They don't go the other way. So this was these fiery serpents. And what began to happen to the people? Numbers 21. What happened to people? They began to die. Getting bit by these snakes. And what did they do? They began to whine again, didn't they? Yeah, Lord, the light bread looked good after that, I guess. But compared to all these snakes. Well, see, God is teaching them a lesson not to complain. You got food. It may not be exactly what you like every day, but it's food. It'll keep you alive until you get to where you're going. So those fiery serpents come in and start biting the people. They start dying. They're falling down left and right like flies. And the people realize, whoa, something's going on. Something's wrong. We need to ask God, please help us. And what did God do?
Give him a cure. Look at the snake.
He told Moses to make a snake out of brass, a molten image, a snake, and put it on a post and put it in the middle of the camp. For what reason? Do you remember? Okay, so Ronnie Turner sitting there, he got snake bit. But there's this brass snake on a pole in the middle of the camp. And Moses said, okay, come in, look at the snake, and you're going to be healed. That's all he's got to do. Look at the snake and be healed. So that's what happened to him. Incidentally, make a long story short, they didn't destroy that serpent until years and years and years later. Became an idol to them later on, after they had their kings and all that mess going on, divided kingdom. So, you know, God had them destroyed. But anyway, so God is making provision for them to be healed. They didn't deserve it. They deserved to die. But why would God do that? Why would God preserve them?
Chosen people.
Pardon me?
Chosen people would be Christ when we come to
Go back to Genesis 49:10. He had to keep them alive. He had to keep them preserved so that Christ could come. There was a people that God had set aside. You remember what happened when they came out of Egypt? Moses went up on Mount Sinai to get the law. He came back to, we call it the Ten Commandments. There's really more to it than that, but that was basic law of Moses was the Ten Commandments. When he came down, he gave those laws to the people. Now, those laws were only given to those people there. There's a lot of other people in the world. There's people in Egypt. There's people living in Canaan at that time. 7 nations, actually, that had already possessed the land of Canaan where they were going to take over. They were going to possess that land that already belonged to 7 nations of people. But that law wasn't given to them. It was only given to the children of Israel. You remember the 5 things we talked about? Of course you don't. 5 things we talked about. God took a special people, special law, brought them into a special land for a special reason, coming of a special person. That's pretty simplistic, but that's basically what it is. That's basically the old law in one nutshell. These people were set aside. God chose them and set them aside, preserved them so that Christ could come. Okay, we get on down and say, oh, this is an old covenant. We don't read it. We don't understand it. We don't ever know it. We get on down to, toward the end of the, Deuteronomy, the first 5 books, Pentateuch, that was written by Moses. Get down to the end of Deuteronomy, and yet Moses is dead. The children of Israel finally, after 40 years wandering in the wilderness, are ready to go in and possess the land. God raises up Joshua. See, he was one of those 2 that survived the 40 years in the wilderness because he gave a good report, him and Caleb. So he's appointed by Moses to bring the children of Israel across the Jordan River into the promised land. And what were they told to do? They were told to destroy those 7 nations of people. They did not do that. All this is in the old law, the old covenant. They destroyed a lot of them. They put the rest of them under tribute. You know, the words made servants out of them. But they didn't destroy them like God told them to. And why would God do that? Why would God say, I want you to destroy these people? Every one of them.
influence.
Exactly. What happened when they didn't destroy them? Influence.
You know, they had back in Egypt.
Yep.
You know, they was under the influence of the Egyptians for 400 years.
Right.
Why did they build a golden calf? Because that's what Egypt worshiped.
Yep. Exactly. They go back to falling back into the old ways.
And it was evil influence.
Evil.
God wasn't being just willy-nilly destroy them.
No.
They were evil.
Yeah.
And he didn't want them corrupting
Well,
with their evil. I mean, if it would have been just, well, it's just ignorant people that don't know better on it was
Right.
evil.
Absolutely. What give God the right to do that? What give God the right to destroy 7 nations of people so he can let another nation come in and take over?
I'll take you out.
I'm God and you're not. In other words, the point I'm trying to get is God is sovereign. God is in charge. God is in control. And God had put up with these nations for a long time, centuries. They weren't getting any better. They were only getting worse. And so he said, the time has come for you to take them out.
You remember earlier, he destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah.
Yeah,
For what purpose? For what reason? And homosexual.
right.
You got
Wicked.
That's sin.
It was evil, wicked people. Couldn't find 10 righteous people in the whole place. So God destroyed it. So anyway, he tells them to go in and destroy these people, and they didn't do it. So then that became a thorn in their side for the rest of the time. Coming all the way down through the period of the judges, another 400 years, up and down, back and forth. So then they want a king. So God gives them a king. King Saul, King David, King Solomon. This is what we call the United Kingdom. All of them united under one king, all 12 tribes. Saul ruled 40 years, David ruled 40 years, Solomon ruled 40 years. 120 years of the United Kingdom. But then Solomon's son, Rehoboam, was heir to the throne. He refused to listen to the wisdom of the older men. He wanted to listen to the guys he grew up with. And as a result of that, the kingdom was divided. A fellow named Jeroboam took the 10 tribes and went north, became the northern kingdom, also referred to as Ephraim, or more often, the nation of Israel. Basically two tribes remained in Jerusalem, in the southern part of Judea, of Judea. So they stayed there. They were Benjamin and Judah. Okay, what happened to the 10 tribes that went north? Okay, after about 300 years, 250 years, give or take, they were so wicked and so idolatrous that God took them away. Yes?
The instruction was worship in Jerusalem.
Right.
Go to Jerusalem.
Right.
Well, that's too far away.
Yeah. Well, see, that's the thing Jeroboam did. To keep the people from going back to Jerusalem, he changed the place of worship from Jerusalem to set up golden calves, idols, in Dan and Bethel, 2 different places. And he changed the priesthood from the Levites to just anybody. And he changed the time of worship. So he changed everything. He didn't want them going back, like you said, Danny. He didn't want them to go back to Jerusalem. They'd be influenced by that. But keep this in mind. People don't know this. But if you read the Old Testament, it'll come to you because it's there. But there were remnants of all 12 tribes that stayed in the southern kingdom. You had the northern kingdom, Israel, the southern kingdom, Judah. There was a remnant, not very many, it was primarily Benjamin and Judah. And that's why it's most often referred to as the kingdom of Judah. Okay, now, where's Christ coming from? Judah. Okay, the 10 tribes that went north, eventually after about 250, 300 years, God sent the Assyrians to come down and take them away. They never came back. Then about 150 years later, he sent the Babylonians to come and take Judah, the southern kingdom, away. Okay. And somewhere during this period, 70 years is how long they were there. They were in captivity for 70 years. Isaiah prophesied, Jeremiah prophesied that they would be there 70 years. Even told who the guy was. So anyway, it would be King Nebuchadnezzar. And God refers to him as Nebuchadnezzar, my servant. Came and took him away to Babylon. To Babylon for 70 years. Okay, but let me ask you a question. The northern kingdom goes into Assyrian captivity, right? What happened to the nation of Assyria?
They were also destroyed.
Pardon me?
They were destroyed also.
By who?
Nebuchadnezzar.
Exactly, by the Babylonians. So, but they've been there 150 years. So they've assimilated. They've got used to the culture and everything else. But they're still Jewish. So here the southern kingdom goes in, and what the Babylonians did, Nebuchadnezzar did, he scattered them throughout his empire. They didn't all go to Babylon, the city. They went throughout the whole empire. Well, they go into places where there's already Jews there, that northern kingdom. You read the book of James. James talks about his letter to the 12 tribes of Israel, not just the 10. So they were still together. And what happened during this 70-year period of captivity, or shortly thereafter, some people think it happened after the captivity between Malachi and Matthew, that the synagogue came about. And that's very important. You only read it one time in the Old Testament, Psalms 94:7, I believe it is, talking about the synagogues being burned up in the land. But we get over to the New Testament, synagogues everywhere. That's where you had to go in between Malachi and Matthew to really find out about the synagogues. Well, synagogues were temporary places of worship where the Jewish people could worship God, and so they never went back to Jerusalem. But after 70 years, the southern kingdom was allowed to come back under the Persians. Okay? So they brought them back in, and they were able to come back and repossess the land. How many of them came back? Okay, they came back first. They had like 3 different coming back, but Zerubbabel, then Ezra, and then Nehemiah. But Zerubbabel brought like 49,000 people, give or take. That wasn't all of them. There were still some back there in Babylon. But they were born in Babylon. They grew up in Babylon. That was their home. They didn't want to go back to Jerusalem. But the older generation did. They wanted to go back and rebuild the temple, rebuild the city, rebuild the walls, go back to the way things used to be. And then God wanted them to. That's what he told them to do. So they came back and they rebuilt the temple.
The Northern Kingdom had been there so long that they had lost track of who they actually were.
Absolutely.
They were mixed and
Yeah.
Samaritans, I guess. So they were Jews. But
Right.
they were not- the Southern Kingdom in the 70 years had a better opportunity to remember lineage, and they to start with weren't, but then they went back and recreated it and traced their lineage because it was important. You couldn't be a priest unless you were of the tribe of
Levi, that's right.
And so the lineage.
Well, they had kept up with that.
Provable lineage,
Yeah.
lineage was very important.
Yeah.
And that was the paperwork that they described was
And when
so important for them to do and keep up with.
When Nebuchadnezzar came and destroyed Jerusalem in 587, he burnt the temple and destroyed the temple. But they kept those records. Those records were kept by the Jewish people down to the time of AD 70.
Get into the temple without much.
Yeah, you couldn't just any nobody. And that was part of their heritage. You got to know where they came from, who their families were, and the land was divided up by those tribes. So they had to keep up. They knew where their heritage was. They knew where they came from. And
Became a sense of entitlement for them.
it did.
And they used that as a crutch in their idol, really, that made them more special, made
That's-
them more chosen, made them, you're either chosen or you're not chosen, you're not more chosen or so they use that, even to this day.
Right. Well, the thing about this is they're in Babylon for 70 years. And I personally believe, in what studies I've done, I personally believe that's when the synagogues were developed. Who is it? Josephus, Jewish historian that lived during the time of Christ and during the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70. That's what he wrote. He believed that that's when it took place during the captivity, 70 years in Babylon captivity, that the synagogues came up. And the synagogues is important because we get the New Testament to everywhere. And that was very instrumental in the spread of the gospel of Jesus Christ. Because where did Jews gather every Saturday? Synagogue. Where did Paul go on the Sabbath? Go to synagogue. Why? Because people there who believed in God. And he would take those Old Testament scriptures and preach to them Jesus, just like the Ethiopian eunuch was taught by Philip on the road as he was going down coming back from Jerusalem, going back to Ethiopia. And Philip joined himself, and he said, we were studying Isaiah, and he said, how can I understand this? Said somebody show me. He said, beginning from those scriptures, he preached to him Jesus. That's what Paul did. That's all he had was Old Covenant, Old Testament law, scriptures, and he'd take that and teach Jesus, yeah.
He knows that he's often to come from Jews to worship.
Yeah.
So why should Philip worship? Why should Philip intervene? He already worships God. Why teach him something else?
Okay.
You understand that they worship. That's not true.
He didn't come to see and be seen, he came to worship. There's a lot of things in the Old Testament, and I'm hitting some highlight stuff we've gone over before, but I wanted to kind of refresh your memory. But there's a lot of other things that we can learn if we go back and study the Old Testament. For example, you hear this, and I know I'm going to run out of time before I get through this, but you hear about people talking about the creation. Was it eons of time each day? Or was it 24-hour days?
24.
Pardon me?
24.
How do we know that? Okay, Exodus 20. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. And in Exodus, it says because God labored 6 days, and on the seventh day he rested. 6 days. Yeah, but that's how they explain the age of the earth. That's where these modernists and evolutionists and whatever else you got thrown in the mix, that's how they explain it. They think the earth is billions of years old. Well, I don't have a problem with that. Because how old was Adam when God made him? Grown man. So God can make the world grown. Anyway, it's been a good class. I appreciate y'all putting up with me. Maybe we learned a little bit of something. I don't know. We kind of rushed through it. But we'll do it again someday. Thanks.